The biggest lesson I have learned throughout my 20s so far is that confidence comes from experience. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because I see a lot of people waiting until they feel confident before they take action. The problem is that confidence comes after the experience, not before it. So in this video, I want to share a couple of things that helped me build confidence over the years and hopefully save some of you a lot of time. One of the biggest things I would encourage anyone in their 20s to do is actively seek new experiences. Most people accidentally live the same year 5 times in a row. They wake up, go to work, come home, go to sleep, and repeat, and wonder why nothing changes. Confidence grows when your experiences grow. That is why I think everyone should have a goal of creating at least one new experience every week. And ideally, one bigger experience every month. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Try a new hobby, visit a new city, talk to someone you normally wouldn't to. Anything that expands your comfort zone. Your brain slowly learns that unfamiliar situations are survivable, and every time that happens, your confidence increases. One of the best decisions I have ever made was leaving my parents' apartment at a relatively young age. I moved away to study in another city. At the time, it felt uncomfortable. Everything was new. New people, new routines, new responsibilities. For the first time, I had to figure things out on my own. Nobody was going to solve my problems for me anymore. That experience accelerated my growth massively. Because when you move somewhere new, you cannot rely on your old habits. You cannot rely on familiar surroundings. You have to adapt. And adaptation builds confidence. That is why I believe young people should leave home relatively early if they can. Not because there is anything wrong with staying home, but because growth usually happens when you remove yourself from comfortable environments. Another thing that helped me tremendously was becoming comfortable with making mistakes. When you're young, you often think mistakes are something to avoid, but mistakes are actually one of the fastest ways to learn. I see this all the time in professional environments. Someone starts a new job. They spend months asking for permission for every little thing. They ask 10 questions before making one decision. And while there's nothing wrong with learning from your seniors, eventually you have to start making your own decisions. You need to take ownership. And because confidence doesn't come from always being right, confidence comes from realizing that even when you're wrong, you can recover. When I started working, I learned from people who were much more experienced than me, and I still do. But after understanding the basics, I always try to make my own calls, my own decisions, my own appointments, my own mistakes, because those mistakes become lessons, and those lessons become confidence. One thing that helped me a lot was journaling. Every evening, I would think about what went well, what I could have done differently. Most people make mistakes and forget about them. I think it is much more useful to analyze them. Now let's talk about discomfort. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid uncomfortable situations, but the uncomfortable situations are usually ones that help me grow the most. One of the biggest examples in my own life was my transition from music into real estate. Before getting into real estate, I spent years producing music. I was sitting in my apartment making beats every day. Most of my work happened behind a computer. I didn't have to talk to many people. I didn't have to negotiate. I didn't have to cold call strangers. Then I got my first job in real estate. I worked as a real estate expansion manager, and suddenly my job was completely different. Instead of sitting alone producing music, I was calling property owners and investors every single day. Some days I made 40 calls, sometimes even more. At first, it was incredibly uncomfortable. I did not enjoy it. I was nervous. I overthought everything. I worried about saying the wrong thing. I worried about sounding stupid. I worried about being rejected. But after doing it for a while, something interesting happened. I realized that most people are actually quite nice. The picture I had built inside my head was completely wrong. Most people don't have bad intentions. Most people are willing to talk and willing to help. And occasionally, you run into someone who is rude. So what? You hang up the phone and move on. That interaction probably won't matter tomorrow. It probably won't matter next week. And it definitely won't matter in 5 years. That realization changed a lot for me. Most things simply do not matter as much as we think they do. The most embarrassing thing that happened to you 2 years ago, you probably don't even think about it anymore. The same thing is true for the mistake you're worried about making today. Think back to school. Maybe you were afraid of speaking during the language class. Meanwhile, there was always one student raising your hand. That student wasn't necessarily smarter. They were just willing to be uncomfortable. Nobody remembers the mistakes that student made. People only remember that they participated. That principle applies to almost everything in life. One practical thing that helped me is making eye contact. It sounds simple, but many people avoid it. The next time you're speaking to someone, look them in the eyes. It may feel uncomfortable at first, but it communicates confidence, and over time it starts feeling natural. Another thing that helped me tremendously is meditation. I try to meditate every single day, usually around 20 minutes. That's enough. The reason I do it is because it helps me separate thoughts from reality. Anxiety often comes from imagining problems that don't actually exist. Meditation helped me realize that many of my fears were entirely self-created. And finally, don't take things personally. This is another lesson that took me years to learn. Someone criticizes your work, rejects your offer, disagrees with you, most of the time it has very little to do with you. People have their own problems, their own frustrations, their own priorities. Learn from feedback, but don't let it define you. And when you make a mistake, own it. Don't make excuses, stand up and fix it. Because people rarely care about mistakes. What people care about is whether you take responsibility. Confidence was never something I needed before taking action. Moving away from home, making music, starting a new career, cold calling, starting this YouTube channel. None of these things felt comfortable when I started, but every single one of those experiences made me stronger. And that is ultimately the biggest lesson I can share. Confidence comes from experience. Experience comes from action. And action usually starts with doing something that makes you uncomfortable. So if you're in the 20s and you're waiting to feel confident before doing something important, stop waiting. Go do the thing. The confidence comes later. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next one.